you are and who you have become has changed over a long period of time. How you think about yourself today is probably quite a bit different than how you thought of yourself in the past, especially if you think about how you thought of yourself 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Your sense of self or your identity or your Ahamkara is a part of your mind that experiences the gunas in a very meaningful and impactful way, right? The way we see ourselves evolves. The ego is, once again, a very necessary part of your mind. And that part of your mind actually grows from your preferences. From your preferences, you begin to build a story of what you like and what you don't, who you are, what decisions you've made based on those preferences. The state of activity, impulsiveness, and variability created by rajas creates a very dynamic and adaptive identity. So you can see that people who are early adopters, they exhibit this really well. So if you're one of those people that has to have like new piece of technology right away, a person that could be like a trendsetter, whether it's in fashion or any other industry. I guess another example would be an investor who is kind of in the know about the new and upcoming like disruptive innovation or technology that's coming out. This type of person, or a highly rajastic person, when confronted with their ego, is able to stay ahead of the curve, right? But of course, that is when they're in balance and in a conditioned rajastic mindset, not at the extremes. So as we dive into this, if you think about the positives of it, the positive combination makes the rajastic identity able to take on a lot of new struggles, and they can adapt to the changing of the environment, the changing needs around them. This type of person seems fearless because they view the unknown as known, or at least somewhat controllable, right? They can be so imaginative that they vividly see the future with such a high level of confidence that it borders certainty. Often they are the type of person that thinks outside of the box. They're a pioneer for new inventions, new ways of doing things, and have this strength and insight to kind of like leave the past behind, right? To look at the old patterns and say, no, I'm gonna get rid of that. And they create a new way of living for themselves and really their whole family, right? Everybody in their circle. They're especially effective in a creative role, as well as in crisis management. This type of person is probably often seen as extremely efficient and productive, but they're probably under a lot of stress too. Even in the most balanced they can be of this combination, they also face a risk of boredom, right? When life becomes stable and somewhat predictable, they likely will create some sort of change, right? They create a challenge and they blatantly create a difficult circumstance because they needed the change. In that way, I like to think that it almost seems like they need to be occupied with something at all times. Now, an imbalance here with the ego and rajas makes the identity become overly competitive and inconsistent. Now, the person becomes really relentless in their personal pursuit of evolution, right? And a lot of times that need of like personal evolution comes from this sense within them that they need to continue to change as well as keep up. Now, because Rajas is born of attachment, they view the things of the world. That's a large source of attachment. They view that and they begin to become greedy and prideful and superficial in whatever they pursue, right? They want to keep up with the Joneses and be able to like have whatever everybody else has. Now, Rajas makes this type of person see the big problems of the world, the big cultural problems. It makes them feel like the big cultural problems are their personal problems. That can be for a lot of reasons. I mean, a couple examples is like maybe they feel like they want to be part of something bigger and something that's going on, or maybe it's because they feel touched by it, right? They score highly on emotionality and they've just like internalized, and it's moved them in a very meaningful way. Either way, they are willing to put aside their own identity to become part of this other identity, to replace it with this other purpose. That is pretty dangerous. Another element here is that Rajas gives us high markings on intellect and liberalism. And that gives this person this tendency to enjoy abstract thinking. And the risk there is that their work becomes very impractical, and especially their work if they want to make a change to the world. Now, moving to the most extreme versions, Rajas and Ahamkara become unable to have any true direction or even a connection with their actual purpose. They develop an idealistic version of themselves as well as an idealistic version of their future, and that becomes a target of their pride, or I guess it becomes what they hold up as the example in the comparison. Their measuring stick is this idealistic view of the future, and therefore that creates this source of extreme anxiety and continued immoderation, right? They constantly reach stronger and farther because they feel inferior to this shadow self, this future self that doesn't really even exist. Now, that may have them aggressively attach themselves or to other people or to causes or groups, just like before. But sometimes they do this for the sake of show. And sometimes they do this because they feel the need to sacrifice their own vision for that of something that's new and more interesting. You know, a common thread here is that they're willing to abandon what is very deep and meaningful to them for a quick win, for this quick piece of fulfillment, right? But it's not true fulfillment. It's kind of cotton candy. This type of person ultimately fails to evolve in any meaningful way because they subjugate their values as well as their principles. We must balance our need to idealize ourselves. As you express yourself and who you are, it has to be grounded, and it has to be practical, and it has to be consistent. Hopefully, the way we see ourselves has a measure of humility and openness to critique, but it's a critique that not necessarily so that you create a change, right? It's more so a critique that inspires you to recommit to who you are and what you actually stand for. So the balancing technique here is placing emphasis on your core, understanding what it is and what isn't you, right? What is and isn't you. Your identity has been fluid and changing far too often. It's too dynamic. That a lot of the patterns, the beliefs, all of that is just simply not part of who you are, not part of your elevated ego, your story. The problem is you continue to repeat them. You repeat those stories, you tell them again and again, and you treat them as though they're indispensable. These attachments to those stories, and I guess those various egos that you've internalized, they're not actually you, right? And they are not worthy of you. You have to recenter yourself on what your story is, on what your values are, and what you have stood for throughout your life without being corrupted by the outside influences, especially the influences that inspired you to change or adopt a new mindset in some way.